Time to begin our class this morning. The weather seems to be slowing people down, kind of like batteries. They're not efficient in cold weather, as some of you know. So cold weather kind of slows down folks. Dawn, would you word a prayer for us while we start our class, please?
Most High and Heavenly Father, we come this morning to study another portion of your word, worship thee, pray the things we do and say according to your will. Be happy with the worship that we give you this day. Father, we pray for our sick and our shut-ins. Pray for those who are sick in hospitals, those lost loved ones. You comfort each and every one of them. Holy Father, we pray for all of our brothers and sisters, this congregation worldwide, that they can be safe and free to worship the manner that you direct us to. Father, as we go through our services here today, we pray the things we do and say according to your will. We pray that you watch over each and every one of us, keep us safe and in your care, go with us. Watch over us and guide us through his spirit blessing.
Amen. Our study this morning is in the 26th chapter of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 26. I was trying to imagine what Isaiah must have understood about what he was writing. Now, when you think about it, he wrote about a lot of things. He lived in an era that was prior to during the Assyrian captivity of northern Israel. He lived prior to the Babylonian captivity of southern Israel. And think about the things that he prophesied about. What were some of the things that he prophesied about? He prophesied about the northern tribes. He prophesied about the Babylonian captivity. He prophesied about the return of the Israel, the tribes, the remnant after the Babylonian captivity. What else did he prophesy about? In fact, that was the focus of his prophecy. That was the focus of his words, his book. He was the messianic prophet. Now, how much of this do you suppose he really understood? What was we talk about the worldviews, we talk about the Christian worldview, we talk about various worldviews. What was the typical Judean, the typical Jew's worldview?
Physical kingdom, earthly, material kingdom.
They were all about wheat and corn and oats. They were all about a secure border, right? Trump isn't the first person to think about a secure border, a wall, right? I mean, walls were something that that was something that took place thousands of years ago, the idea of walls. So the typical Jews' view of the world, or worldview, had to do with the kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel, rather. It had to do with preservation. But in the back of their minds, you suppose their view was maybe world domination. Do you think that might be the case? You think they might have had a view like some of the leaders today that they're going to be in charge of the world? Are there leaders today that have that mentality? That they're going to be the leader of the world? Yeah. And they had, no doubt, I mean, the kingdom of Solomon, how expansive was that? The kingdom of David, how expansive was that? Pretty much the known world, right? Pretty much across the, that region. Now, Isaiah comes along and he talks about a lot of different things. But the typical Jew is probably thinking, we're God's people and we're going to prevail regardless of what we do, regardless of how we act, regardless of our righteousness or unrighteousness. We're going to be God. We're God's people, right? They no doubt have that mentality. And so, what do you suppose all this teaching and all of this information and all these prophecies, what do you suppose that meant to the people of his day? It probably didn't mean very much. Well, in chapter 26, chapter 25, he talked about, there was a statement in chapter 25 about Moab, about this, and kind of representative of the enemies of the Jews. In chapter 26, first verse, he talks about a strong city. And we need to think about, well, what's that about? Well, as the chapter is divided, as chapter 26 is divided into kind of schools of thought, the first 6 verses have to do with the idea of comfort for God's people by contemplating the future and the future in contrast to the present, the future glory. It has to do a contrast between those first 6 verses have a contrast between the city of the world, so to speak, and the strong city. Verses 17 through 19 is a song that contains laments, a song that contains trust for God, confession, praise for God. And then the last couple of verses of this chapter have to do with the fact that God is going to punish the world, going to punish the wicked. When we use the word world here, we're talking in terms of the wicked. And so it's broken up into first 6 verses, and then 7 through 19, and then the last couple of verses having to do with the punishment of evildoers. The first thing that people want to do when they are hurt by somebody is to do what? Is to strike back. Now, is there any place, what business do we have of trying to punish somebody for the wrong that they have done us? Okay? What? Is that our business? Whose business is it to punish the wicked? Pardon me? Yes, that's not our business, right? If we think about it, if we have that mentality, it's not our business to punish those who are opposing us, who do bad things to us, that's in a different realm. God takes care of that, right? Now that's hard to, that's hard to put in practice, right? But punishment is God's business. Mark, do you disagree with that? You have a pensive look.
Just listening.
Okay. Well, I guess you can have a pensive look and be listening, or daydreaming, or otherwise. Well, chapter 1, verse 1, in that day, now here we go again, in that day. When writers of the Scriptures talk about that day, do they always mean the same thing? That day. Does it always mean the same thing? Is it always, that day, is it always a specific, only a specific day?
Are they talking about one day, or is it referring to that day being a particular moment in time?
I think when they use the word that day, they're talking about a particular time frame, but when the Scriptures talk about that day, does it always mean the same that day?
Don't think so.
Don't think so. Why not, Herschel?
I can't recall, but I think it's an expression that used a couple of times, including it.
That day could refer to the final day, the judgment day. That day could refer to the origin of the New Testament realm. That day could have referred, you have to figure out the context, but that day could refer to the day that the Babylonians captured Jerusalem. Or that day could refer to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So when that expression, that day, is used, you have to figure out the context. And of course, we have the advantage of looking back on history, and an advantage that Isaiah didn't have, of course, as he looked forward. In that day, this song be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. Salvation will God appoint for walls and bulwarks. Now, that day then, let's look at the context there. What's the context of that day, in that day? Well, there's going to be, this song shall be sung in the land of Judah. Does that necessarily mean Jerusalem? The real estate there around, Jerusalem? We shall have a strong city. Salvation shall be appointed, shall God appoint for walls and bulwarks. Now, that day here, in the context of that language, means what? What period of time is he talking about? Even after Jerusalem was restored, after the Babylonian captivity, after the walls were put up, after the temple was rebuilt, was that a strong city? Was that what would have been identified in the Old Testament period of time as a strong city? Probably not. This idea of salvation will God appoint for walls. Now, walls and bulwarks, that is defensive systems, were important for the preservation of a city. But what kind of walls is he talking about here? Let's look at that language here. We have a strong city. Salvation will God appoint for walls and bulwarks. Now, is he talking about the actual walls of a particular city? He's got to be talking about something other than a physical city. He's talking about salvation. Where did that come? Where did that come to fruition? Where did salvation come to fruition? It was through Christ. You see, so that day he must be talking about the salvation, the period of time when the New Testament church came into existence. Now, what are the walls for the church? Does the church, now this is kind of a dumb question, but does the church have any walls? There are no walls, no physical walls. There's no selected real estate or territory or zip code on earth where the church is confined. The church is without walls, and Isaiah's saying that salvation is the wall. That is the saving power, the protection. And it now is an individual thing. You see, for the Jews it was a national thing. It was a racial thing that God was protecting them. But now it is an individual. Salvation is an individual thing. Now he says, and now he further talks about this whole idea of, we can point to the New Testament era here. Open ye the gates, that the righteous nation which keepeth the truth may enter in. Now what's he talking about there? Open the gates. He's talking about open ye the gates, that the righteous nation which keepeth the truth may enter in. Now what's he talking about? Is he talking about all of the Gentile nations? Everybody within those Gentile nations? Pardon me? Anyone who seeks the truth. See, he's talking about open ye the gates, that the righteous nation, the righteous, the God-fearing, the God-seeking people of the various nations, which keepeth the truth, may enter in. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace. Now, does that have anything to do with Jesus, with the New Testament concept of peace that passeth all understanding? Okay. Christ was all about peace, right? He talked about a peace that passeth all understanding. Open ye the gates, in verse 2, that the righteous nation may keepeth truth and may enter in. And then thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Now that peace is going to come, he's saying here. How's it going to come? To whom is it going to come? To whose mind is stayed on thee. What's that expression? Whose mind is stayed on thee. I mean, what's that idea of it? Your mind stayed on something. What's that mean? Focused on what? So, well, it can be focused on anything, but stayed on. So, the mind that is stayed on God, because he trusteth in thee. Now, you have to wonder, what was Isaiah thinking when he penned these words? Did he understand this? Was there any way that he could have conceptualized the ideas that he's talking about? Wouldn't it have been pretty hard for him? I mean, this was new stuff. Trust ye the Lord forever, verse 4 says. For in the Lord, Jehovah, is everlasting strength. Verse 5. For he bringeth down them that dwell on high. The lofty city he layeth low. He layeth it low, even to the ground. He bringeth it even to the dust. Now, this idea of a lofty city, see, in chapter 25 he talked about Moab. And he used Moab as an illustration of that which is opposed to God. Now, what about this idea of a lofty city?
Would that be a group of persons who think better than God or other men?
So that's one idea. The lofty city. Name some lofty cities of the world today. Just, pardon me? Today. Think of them. New York, Los Angeles, Paris. You know, name. Now, wonder why he uses that expression, city. Why didn't he say the country area? Or the desert? Or where does typically where does evil concentrate itself? In the big cities, right? Isn't that where? Pardon me?
I guess anywhere you have a group of people.
Yeah, and anywhere you have a large group of people would typically be the cities, you know, right? But evil seems to concentrate in the cities. Las Vegas, you know, name. So is he talking about a particular city here, do you suppose? The lofty city? I think he's just using that as an expression of, or as a symbol of, any big city, particularly a big city that is evil in nature. He says here, in verse 5, for he bringeth down them that dwell on high. The lofty city, he layeth it low. He layeth it low. Wonder why he repeats that. King James Version have a mistake there or something? Why does he say he layeth it low? He layeth it low.
Sometimes they repeat it with emphasis.
Yeah, it's emphasis. You know, when you know, we don't we do that today in our expressions? You repeat something, you know, and then it'll be repeated again, right? I mean, that's a sure thing. It's emphasis. He emphasized, even to the ground he bringeth it, even to the dust. Is there any message there in that verse for today? Is there any message? Lofty city, lofty. Kathy?
Even if no matter how high in life they may take the hour, they enjoy the fruits for the day, eventually God's going to take his son and judge them all.
Yeah.
They will be brought down and they will bow down to God's feet.
Which brings up another point, or an adjacent point. In the judgment, will there be any non-believers? Now think about that. In the judgment, there won't. Huh?
Everybody will know.
Every knee shall bow, right? Yeah. So the humankind has a problem with arrogance and people feeling better than the other, somebody else, and being high and mighty, and I've got a bigger. This might sound political, but I've got a bigger button on my desk than the guy in North Korea, bomb button. Without getting into politics, that's not the kind of attitude that America or anybody else ought to have. We appreciate the fact that we have a great nation, but that doesn't give us license to be arrogant, right? That doesn't give us license to be feeling like we're better than somebody else, For he bringeth down them that dwell on high in the lofty city. He layeth it low, even to the ground. He bringeth it even to the dust. Now, in the scheme of things, it's hard to imagine that God would eliminate, destroy all of mankind's collective accomplishments. Is that hard to get your mind around? It's hard for me to get my mind around that. All of the great structures, all the great buildings, all the great armaments and so forth. But that appears to be the case. Verse 6, the foot shall trod it down. That is, he's talking about this lofty city. The foot shall tread it down. That is, walk over it, even the feet of the poor and the steps of the needy. I mean, this lofty city, this whatever that lofty city epitomizes, that lofty city that has to do with evil, it'll be brought down and trodden underfoot, so to speak. Verse 7, the way of the just is uprightness. Well, now, is that a profound statement? That doesn't seem to be very profound, does it? The way of the just is uprightness. Ned, is that profound? And that just seems to me like the way of the just is uprightness. Well, that just seems normal. That just makes sense, doesn't it? But I'm wondering what he's getting at here. Thou, most upright, dost weigh the path of the just. Well, that kind of makes sense. Verse 8, yea, in the way of thy judgments, O Lord, have we waited for thee. Now, yea, in the way of thy judgments, O Lord, have we waited for thee. The desire of our soul is to thy name, and the remembrance of thee. Now, what's he talking about there? What's it mean? Yea, in the way of thy judgments. Is he talking there about punishments? Is he talking there about his precepts? What's he talking about when he says, "Oh, or in the way of thy judgments have we waited for thee"? And the desire of our soul is to thy name and to the remembrance of thee. In terms of the meaning of judgments, is it punishment? Is it precepts? Is it teaching? What's he talking about there? Well, maybe we need to read further to see if we can get the context of that. Verse 9, with my soul have I desired thee in the night. Here it appears to be, here's a kind of a song, an expression of individuals. With my soul have I desired thee in the night. Yea, with my spirit within me will I seek thee early. For when thy judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. Now, here, what do you think judgment has to do with? Does that imply punishment here? Does the worldly person, the person out here in the world, the person that's not particularly interested in God, can those people be influenced by God's, let's say, goodness? The rain comes on the just and the unjust, right? The just appreciate it, right? And attribute it to God. But what about the unjust? They take it for granted, right? And so, but when there's a judgment from God, when there's a huge problem, what do people tend to do? What did the leaders of this nation do after 9/11? Pardon me? They came together for prayer sessions, right? But how long did that last? It was kind of in a heartbeat, it was gone. Once they got things cleaned up at the Twin Towers, it was gone. Well, so do people that are not particularly interested in God, do they learn anything by how do they learn things? You know, a person that has no interest in God, and they're not particularly influenced by the fact that God is good and provides rain and provides resources and so forth. But how do they get interested in God? Okay?
For some, it will be on the judgment when they realize there is God. But like the cities he refers to,
Yeah.
people believe that it's by their own power that they built the wealth or whatever they've done. But in the end, it might be in the end when they realize it, because some even on their deathbed don't change.
Now, there are a lot of great people, a lot of benevolent people, a lot of people that do great works. But don't necessarily attribute that motivation to anything that has anything to do with God, right? Now, how do you get to those people? Well, the Scripture provides plenty of opportunity for people to learn about the judgment of God, right? You read through Scripture, from beginning to end, you get an idea about the judgment of God, the severity of God, right? Now, in our daily Bible reading, we ought to be at the 24th chapter of Genesis today. All right? Now, in the first 24 verses, or the first 24 chapters of Genesis, have you read anything about God's judgment? Is there anything about God's judgment, about His severity, in the first 24 chapters of Genesis? Plenty, right? Well, I think the point he's trying to make here is that the inhabitants of the earth, I think the people that are not in tune with God, they're not going to learn anything with regard to coming into a relationship with God unless they understand the judgments of God, His severity, His capacity to punish. Lord, in verse 11, when thy hand is lifted up, Lord, when thy hand is lifted up, they will not see, but they shall see and be ashamed for their envy at the people. Yea, the fire of thine enemies shall devour them. Now he says, Lord, when thy hand is lifted up, they will not see, but they shall see. Well, some people aren't even going to be affected by the fact that God does punish, but as Ned pointed out here a while ago, when God's hand is lifted up, and they don't see, but they shall see, and be ashamed for their envy at the people. Yea, the fire of thine enemies shall devour them. So, the point here is that there are those who aren't going to be affected by anything that God does or anything that God has revealed that he had done in the past. But there is a time of reckoning. Verse 12. Lord, thou wilt ordain peace for us, for thou also hast wrought all of our works in us. Verse 12 there isn't very interesting. Verse 12 and 13 are very interesting. Lord, thou wilt ordain peace for us. Here's talking about the New Testament era here. For thou hast also hast wrought all our works in us. O Lord our God, other lords beside thee have had dominion over us. But thee only will we make mention of thy name. Now, when he says that, and he had used that expression, O Lord our God, other lords beside thee have had dominion over us. What's he talking about there? What lords is he talking about? Is he talking about Nebuchadnezzar? Is he talking about some of the world leaders that had attempted to have domination over Israel? Or is he talking about something else? What gave Israel more trouble than the enemies from outside? Pardon me?
Their own sin.
And particularly, what sins? Particularly, idolatry. Was there a time when Baal had domination over Israel? Was there a time when Molech, the god where they sacrificed babies, was there a time when those gods had domination? Now, obviously those gods were nothing, but in the minds of the people, right? They dominated. You see, they dominated the activities of the people. Those gods dominated, the belief in those gods dominated the activities, the mindset, the attitude of those people, and thus had domination. So, O Lord our God, other lords besides thee have had dominion over us, but by thee only will we make mention of thy name. Verse 14, they are dead. They shall not rise. Therefore hast thou visited and destroyed them and made all their memory to perish. Now, in the land of Christendom, is there anybody out there that has mixed Baal worship with Christendom? Don't think so. Is there anyone out there that has mixed the worship of Molech? Don't think so. In other words, these gods that dominated Judah are dead. They're dead among the Jews today, those practicing Jews. Point being that these gods have been destroyed. And there are lots of other gods. Mercury, all of those gods that the Romans had, gone. Thou, in verse 15, thou hast increased the nation. O Lord, thou hast increased the nation. Now, here's this repetition again. Emphasis, right? He says, thou hast increased the nation, O Lord, thou hast increased the nation. Thou art glorified. Thou hast removed it far unto all the ends of the earth. Now, when he talks about increase the nation there, he's talking about the increase in the kingdom, the church. They are Now, in this way, God is glorified. Thou hast removed it far into all the ends. Lord, in trouble have they visited thee. They poured out a prayer when thy chastening was upon them. Like as a woman with child that draweth near to the time of her delivery, is in pain and crieth out in her pangs, so we have been in thy sight. Now, here, did the bell ring or what? I guess people are coming in, so we'll stop right there then.